first of all, what's your understanding of why the Assad regime fell so fast now?
Well, there are a lot of people out there telling various stories about it. You've spent time in the Middle East. So have I. You know the lay of the land. You can, as the Israelis have discovered, as we've discovered, buy off large numbers of people if you're smart and you're patient and you know who to talk to. This should not come as a big surprise. So I'm sure that large numbers of officers and probably senior NCOs and soldiers were purchased right there at the beginning or in the months leading up to it. So that's not surprising. The second thing is we've practically destroyed Syria. The only income-producing capability on Syrian soil is up in the area that the Kurds control and that we occupy, the oil fields. And that oil has been sold on the black market and spirited down to Israel. And the Kurds have benefited enormously from that because they want to build their own independent state. And that's not lost on anybody that knows the region right now. And that's another issue we should address in the future. So I don't think we should be very surprised by it. In fact, the big income generator, if you will, was drug trafficking in and through Syria, largely championed by the Syrian army, because they just haven't got any cash. They haven't got any money. The place is impoverished. So the fact that it fell apart quickly was not surprising, but it was done in a way that I don't think we, not necessarily us, but certainly not the Russians or the Iranians anticipated. And it was a master stroke. Now we'll talk about this master stroke strategically, what it means for the two principal winners. One is Mr. Netanyahu, and the other is Mr. Erdogan, because those are the two standout, beneficiaries of what's now occurred.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about both of those, but before we do, that there's one other entity that wants to set up and say, no, that actually we're the ones who did this. This is a great deal for us. Here's what President Biden said when they asked to explain how all this happened.
For years, the main backers of Assad have been Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. But over the last week, their support collapsed, all three of them, because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when I took office. Our approach has shifted the balance of power in the Middle East. Through this combination of support for our partners, sanctions, and diplomacy, and targeted military force when necessary, we now see new opportunities opening up for the people of Syria and for the entire region.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I see a lot of opportunities for the Syrian people as a result of all of our militant policies over the years here. How do you see that?
Well, no one in Washington cares about the people living in Syria any more than they care about the Ukrainians. Let's be frank. The people in Washington and the CIA and at the top of the government, and to a lesser extent, they're big supporters on the Hill and big donors, are engaged in a strategic chess game, and they're very proud of themselves. And they think that they've won in this master stroke. So listen, he's telling you somewhat the truth. But this really began under Obama. Obama was the architect. I don't want to say he was the architect, but this all began under him. And the whole process of repurposing the Al-Qaeda, ISIS terrorists, reforming them, rebranding them, and representing them in a new form that could be useful to the West, to Europe, and the United States is what's happened. Now, I think we're going to be surprised about the long-term consequences. Remember, ISIS was also something that was dear and near to the heart of President Erdogan in Turkey, until suddenly ISIS began to turn on them and on others in the region. And slowly people saw the wisdom of driving it out. Well, it was never completely exterminated, and it's almost impossible to do that in the Middle East. The Middle East is a place with lots of porous borders, lots of patrons who are willing to support various factions. So you're never going to crush any of these organizations, whether it's ISIS or Hamas or Hezbollah, completely out of existence. But I think what he has said is that the desire is to fundamentally change the Middle East. That has happened. And we need to talk about that, because Americans are not in the least interested in most cases. And they're going to watch as this may come back to bite us and everybody else in the future.
Uh, Before we look at the Israel and Turkey specifically, I want to look at the instrument that was used by all those who were supporting him, and that is HTS and Jelani. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what you know about him and what you think could happen later, because just a real brief. In the 2004-5 area, he actually fought against the United States as part of the insurgency in Iraq and was put in jail there for a while, and then later became affiliated with al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate, then later with ISIS, then kind of repudiated them. Now he's saying these days that he's a moderate guy and that he's not going to persecute the Christians or the Druze or any of these other folks. He just wants to govern effectively. First of all, do you think that he has actually changed, and what do you think is going to happen with him going forward?
Well, Dan, I'm not an Arabist, and I don't claim to be an expert on events and peoples in the Middle East. My view of all of this is largely strategic. He's a useful tool right now to us, more specifically to President Erdogan. He was turned, if you will, with what? Cash? Promises of power and influence. I mean, this is a man who led a group of people that just a couple of years ago were selling women on the streets of towns in Syria for $10 a piece. This is someone who has been active in the beheadings, the mass rapes, the mass murder of anybody that he and his band of Islamist thugs didn't care for. These are the people that, you know, most Americans would be repelled by if they looked at it very closely. But they turned out to be useful to us. My point is, I don't think anything's changed in his mind. And I think now he's very focused, once again, on the things he was focused previously on. And that is going back into Iraq. And we need to understand that. Once they've gained control of most of Syria, then it will be northern Iraq. And they're already moving in those directions. And I think the Iraqis know that. This is a major war developing. Now, how far will he get? Well, he has the backing of Turkish military power. He has the support in terms of close air support of Turkish armed drones. And there are Turkish intelligence officers who are not just helping to guide him and move his forces where they can make great gains in a short period of time. And you know what the desert is like. You can go a long distance very quickly in any number of places. It may or may not mean much. But the point is, this is not a new Renaissance man. These are not diversity sensitive people. That's all nonsense. That's for external consumption. I saw this kind of nonsense go on in the Balkans with the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was nothing more than a Stalinist drug mafia. And that certainly was transformed into Jeffersonian Democrats. You know, we do this all the time. Whoever the enemy is demonized, and whoever is doing our bidding is suddenly a liberal Renaissance character. It's a lot of nonsense. This is all about power. And the power is now split largely between Israel and Turkey.
Okay, yeah. And let's actually look at
one camp or another.
Let's look at that then. Now let's go in the Turkish area first. So overnight, I think the Syrian National Army, which is a Turkish-backed group, has taken Manbij and are threatening to take even more territory that is currently, or has been anyway, operated by the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Kurds. How far do you think that the Turks want to go in there, and will the Turkish armed forces themselves actually end up being engaged?
Well, we don't know what was informally agreed to or formally agreed to between Israel and Turkey. We know that the head of Shin Bet just a couple of weeks ago, or 3 or 4 weeks ago, was in Ankara for talks. And a lot of us looked at that and surmised that something was happening, but we couldn't quite put our fingers on it. This was a grandiose plan that was hatched in order to decapitate everybody's enemy. Who's everybody's enemy? Iran, its proxies, Hezbollah, the Shiites. And so you have the Sunni Muslim leader of the Sunni Muslim world, de facto, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan, who has sat down now with his Israeli counterparts, and the Israelis want this thing called Greater Israel. And he's taken the position, that's fine. You can have Greater Israel. This is what we want. Now, I don't know where that line of demarcation between where Turkish power and influence ends and where Israeli power and influence begins. But I can tell you that the effects of the Islamists and Mr. Erdogan, who's backing them, are being felt now in Jordan and all the way to Egypt. And they're starting to make their presence felt down in Iraq. And I think the people in the Emirates are also watching, as are the Saudis. They are not necessarily cheering, and they certainly aren't anxious to rush over into the arms of Israel or Turkey at this stage. But I think what we're looking at is essentially two men with two, at least at the moment, complementary visions strategically of what each wants in the region. We support one of them. We don't necessarily support Erdogan, but we're helpful to him insofar as he serves our purposes. And right now, since he's anti-Iranian, anti-Shiite, and willing to do business with Israel, we're willing to do business with him. The question is, how long does this last?
And one of the other questions, especially when Trump enters office here, is what to do about the U.S. troops in Syria, in the area where the Syrian Democratic Forces, and what does he do with the Syrian Democratic Forces themselves? Does he just abandon them? Does he say, y'all just got to make your own deals? How does Trump manage that? Because there's some feedback, fallback, pushback that could come as a result of that because of how long we've been there. Sure. You and I have been arguing they should leave for a long time ago, but that's what he's going to have to face. How does that going to work out?
Well, the